Often Christianity is boiled down to a tasteless paste of mushy phrases. Be nice to others, and they'll be nice to you. God only gives us what we can handle. When God closes a door, he will open a window. And God helps those who help themselves. None of this is biblical. None of this is Christian. I would, in fact, argue that much of the basis of these platitudes is at odds with Jesus' message. Jesus, in today's gospel, does not promise that life is going to be easy and that everyone is going to like you if you follow him. Instead, he promises that I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter in law against her mother in law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. Ugh, that's not the Christianity that so many of us expect. We expect Christianity to be domesticated, not something that is going to put us at odds with our own families. I mean, the core of Christianity is love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Who is going to be upset with you for love? Well, as we see in our world today, a lot of people, including members of our own family, because the love we are called to is not a naive love that says, I love everybody, but is oblivious to history, both of individual persons, and of the whole world. Rather, we are called to love, which speaks of the truth of sin and that refutes that sin and promises to do better, but still loves humanity and one another. When looking at our first reading, we see how the Bible has addressed this issue. Hagar was Sarah's slave. When Sarah's father gave her to Abraham to marry, he also gave Sarah people, including Hagar's grandmother, to take care of her. When Hagar's grandmother had a daughter, this daughter, Hagar's mother, became Sarah's property. When Hagar's mother in turn had a daughter, that daughter too, Hagar, also became Sarah's slave. It is not clear whether Sarah was kind or cruel to Hagar, but Hagar was forced to do whatever Sarah told her to do. This included sleeping with Abraham to produce Ishmael, who was supposed to be later adopted by Sarah. Let's put that another way. Hagar was raped by Abraham at Sarah's direction, so that later Sarah could steal the baby and declare him her own. And then, as we read today, when Isaac was born, it became clear that Ishmael was not going to be needed and that he would have a claim on Isaac's inheritance, on Sarah's son's inheritance. Sarah forced both Hagar and her toddler boy into the desert with just enough bread and water to get out of sight before dying. This is the great matriarch and patriarch of ancient Israel, holding generations of people in bondage, forcing them to work for them, and then committing rape, planning a kidnapping, and then attempting to murder a young woman and a toddler. Now, yes, we can say that by the morals of the day, they did nothing wrong. That's just the way things were. It isn't right to judge historical figures by today's ethics. Everybody was doing things like that back then. Through Sarah and Abraham, the Israelites came into being. Without Sarah and Abraham, there would be no Judaism and there would be no Christianity. So let's just take that evil they did and put it over there in the corner and ignore it. It doesn't fit the narrative we want, so let's not talk about it. But that is not God's way. And if we are truly Christians, it should not be our way either. God does not condone or accept this evil as good. But God does accept that this evil has been done, and done by someone that he loves. Even while they were committing these evils, God continued to love Sarah and Abraham deeply. But God does not shy away from the wrong that they did either. God embraces Hagar and Ishmael in this moment. God saves them from death and makes sure that Ishmael is able to grow up in this wilderness. And through God, the Ishmaelites, the tribe of the prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, survived. And through Muhammad, Muslims came into being. God does not create evil or even condone evil in the world. But when this good, but imperfect creation that we are part of creates evil, God works to create something good from that evil. The evil still exists, but so does the good. Now, I have heard many people today try to defend Confederate flags and statues of Confederate generals and the fathers of Jim Crow laws and Columbus as being our history. And when people point out that even the good General Robert E. Lee owned people, sold women, men, and children away from their families, and when 3 people tried to escape, he had them stripped to the waist and lashed until their backs were covered in open wounds, and then had a brine of salt water rubbed into these wounds. Or that Columbus not only ordered massacres of indigenous peoples, took survivors in chains back to Europe to live as slaves, and advocated for the rape of children. Their response is that it was a different time. That's just the way things were. It isn't right to judge historical figures by today's ethics. Everybody was doing things like that back then. Look, without the Civil War or Columbus, our world as we know it would not exist. These figures are an important part of our history, and we need to remember them. We need to read about them in our textbooks as children. But that does not mean that we need to have statues glorifying these men in every city park, or to wave Confederate flags in parades at sporting events or from our homes. We need to make sure that we study them, but as Christians, we need to take a cue from the Bible that we revere. We need to stop lying to ourselves and our children. We need to include in our textbooks the good, the bad, and the ugly. Those of us who are grown need to go back and relearn our history. And we need to have a serious conversation about who we should be revering as a nation, about who we build statues to, and about whether we should be creating statues to individuals at all, about which flags are acceptable and which ones are hate speech, and about whose faces we have on our bills. And we as Christians need to bring our Christian beliefs into this conversation. Beliefs based in love and forgiveness, but not forgetfulness. Beliefs based in a God who creates good out of the greatest evils. And beliefs based in a knowledge that we need not be afraid because this God is with us through it all. Amen.